So ask lots of questions around that to establish the vendor's motivation and the timing of the sale. And then I ask very clear and concise questions of the selling agent. What will buy the property today? And then I shut up. And then you'll hear them flounder. You'll hear them jump down your throat sometimes with an answer straight away. You'll hear them have a long pause and really think about it and give you a proper answer. You'll hear them tell you what the last offer was and where the vendor's at currently. There's a multitude of different answers and different directions I can go in, but it's me asking that very direct question. I can't stress this enough that whether you use me or another property professional, if you're a purchaser and you're serious, outsource it to someone else that has done this for their career and understands the nuances when they're negotiating, because they will get more out of these conversations than you ever will.
Welcome to the Get Invested podcast, where we share great conversations with experts from all walks of life to uncover their secret know-how and where they invest their time, their skills and their money, and the benefits that this has created. You see, the truth is that everyone invests. Every minute of every day, we're investing our time, our skills, our energy and our money in something. Some of us are investing consciously, some unconsciously, sometimes for good, sometimes for bad, and sometimes for no impact. Get Invested will help you to start living by design, not by default. I'm going to help you to make it happen, not let it happen. You will hear the top tips on how you can live with conscious intent so that you can live more, work less, and leave a living legacy by investing now. Listen to the show to discover the top tips on how to get started, make the most of your investment journey, and ultimately to be living your dream, not someone else's. More episodes can be found on iTunes or at bushymartin.com.au/get invested. Thanks for listening, and now let's get invested. Hi, freedom fighters. Now, given the limited supply of properties compared to the massive current demand, finding good quality properties and then being able to outsmart the competing hordes to get the property, many of whom are still prepared to pay way beyond expectations, is proven to be slow, painstaking, stressful, and very frustrating hard work. So how do you separate yourself from the FOMO buying pack? How do you successfully outsmart your competition and level a playing field with sellers' agents to both find, negotiate, and secure a property in these hyper-competitive conditions? How can you position yourself to ensure that your offer is more appealing to the selling agent and the property seller than anyone else? What should and shouldn't you be doing to best position yourself in these highly contested conditions? Well, if you've already listened to part one of Scott Aggett's conversation on last week's episode, along with his inspiration for my separate deep dives on transparency and the power of silence in negotiation as part of the new and improved Get Invested format, then I know that you'll be bursting at the seams to enjoy today's concluding segment that will help you answer all of these vexing questions. As you'll know by now, your ability to negotiate will make or break the results you achieve with your property purchases and portfolio growth, and in fact significantly impact on every area of your life. And unfortunately, this critical element doesn't get anywhere near enough attention. It's why Scott's unique dedicated professional property negotiation service is turning the industry on its head by filling the much-needed gap for property purchasers that, for the most part, underdo negotiation when they try to do it themselves, along with a lot, but not all, buyer's agents who have an underlying bias to get the deal done so they can get paid. So let me reinforce that Scott is not a buyer's agent. He's a dedicated professional property negotiator. Leveraging over 2 decades of real estate agent experience and having operated on all sides of property transactions as a vendor, purchaser, agent and investor, Scott intimately understands all sides of the property purchase equation, and it's why Scott consistently gets you exceptional property negotiation results. Scott and his business Hello House level the playing field for you in normal David and Goliath property purchases, where you, as an occasional part-time negotiator, are up against selling agents who eat, sleep and breathe negotiation every single day of the week. This is why most buyers end up paying an emotional premium, and often more than a property's worth, or worse still, they miss out completely and end up settling for something less out of sheer and utter frustration. Now this means that once you find the home you want, Scott then works with you by providing advice and negotiation strategies, as well as engaging directly with a selling agent on your behalf in order to get the property you want at the price you want without all the stress and the headache. In this way, Hello House is pioneering a new model for buying property, and it's the only completely transparent, performance-based property negotiation service exclusively for home buyers and investors in Australia. In fact, I've been so impressed with Scott's approach that even though I've negotiated a lot of deals over the years, my wife Sonia and I are engaging Scott to negotiate our next property purchase. But Scott's expertise doesn't end there. He also helps property sellers. So on the flip side, if you're looking to sell your home, Hello House adds significant value by using his considerable experience and expertise to help you engage the best selling agent to optimise your outcomes. Why does he do this? Because unfortunately, the choice of selling agent, again, can make or break your sales outcome. Because there's a massive variation across the industry in terms of selling skills and expertise. And it doesn't come down to the brand, it comes down to the ability of the individual selling agent. Unfortunately, a lot of order-taking selling agents almost expect properties to sell themselves. So they start by telling you what you want to hear about your property and overinflate the appraisal of what your property is worth in order to secure the listing. And then once they've engaged, they spend the rest of the time talking you down on price expectations so they can get a quick sale and get their commission and get paid. Again, the devil's in the detail, and Scott's years of previous experience as a successful selling agent and real estate office principal enables him to become your eyes, ears, arms and legs with prospective selling agents in order to sort the sheep from the goats and ensure that you're actually getting the best available agent for your specific needs because, like everything else, it's not the cost you pay, but the value that you get that makes all the difference. In this way, Scott and his Hello House team do two things absolutely brilliantly. Firstly, for buyers, he negotiates your best purchase price, and for sellers, he selects the right agent to manage your sale. So at the end of the day, Scott and his team save you and other property buyers and sellers money, stress and time with transparent processes that are tailored to work for you. And to get you even more excited about the wonderful world of negotiation, in addition to the previous deep dives on negotiation I've drilled down to in my introductions to Get Invested episodes 154 with Kate Bakos and episode 179 with Todd Sloan, today Scott reveals some of his best negotiation tips and tricks. So during our ear-opening chat, Scott reveals the strategies, tactics and tricks that selling agents use to put buyers at a disadvantage, as well as how you can notice and avoid them. He shows you how you can build rapport with selling agents in order to glean as much info as possible, along with what questions you do and don't ask a selling agent. We talk about what information you shouldn't be telling selling agents. Scott covers the other negotiation points a buyer can use to get their offer to stand out and be more appealing to both the agent and the selling vendor. He also covers the best negotiation approaches for the different methods of sale, including private treaty, auction strategies, and the popular best offer buy approach, together with a whole stack of other negotiation gold. And if after today's conversation you're as excited as I am about the massive value that Hello House can add to your next property purchase or property sale, then feel free to reach out to Scott and his team at www.hellohouse.co. That's Hello, house as the Germans say it, HAUS.co. That's hellohouse.co. And let them know that Bushy referred you. And if you want to start or continue investing in your knowledge, join me and many other like-minded investors in our Get Invested community right now. I send you a free and exclusive monthly email full of practical self, health and wealth wisdom that our current Freedom Fighter subscribers can't wait to get every month. It's full of investment and lifestyle tips, my personal book recommendations, apps I use to enhance life and so much more. Just visit bushymartin.com.au and sign up at the bottom of the page, because this is just the beginning. And on the subject of new beginnings, I'd love to get your feedback on the new bi-weekly Get Invested format, where I share my own deep thoughts and inspirations on topics of interest at the beginning of the week, followed by separate guest interviews later in the week. So hit me up with the good, the bad and the ugly on a no-holds-barred basis, along with any other suggestions and or topics or guests you'd like to hear by emailing me directly at bushy@knowhowproperty.com.au. Because I can't grow if I don't know. And now it's time to get into it. Following on from last week's opening part of our conversation, we pick up where I asked Scott about the biggest mistakes that people make around buying property. So enjoy all of this rare negotiation wisdom with Scott Aggett. Mate, I want to sort of now switch into the sweet spot of the conversation for you and I, and that's to start focusing in and around the whole area of property negotiation in particular.
Sure.
Can we kick that off by just to set the scene? What are some of the biggest mistakes that you see people make around buying property?
I think lack of education is the biggest thing in terms of market knowledge. So the number one thing I can say to buyers, when they first start out, is you need to have an absolute knowledge of market depth in terms of the buyers that you're competing against, and supply and demand metrics, right? You got to understand how long it's going to take to replicate that asset if you miss it, because that's going to determine how hard you need to go at the offer. So you've got to be watching every live auction you can in a marketplace if they exist with the type of asset you're buying. That'll give you an understanding of what people are paying in real time, and also give you a true understanding of what the market depth is in terms of buyer competition. And you physically got to do the hard work to boots on ground and get through open for inspections for, I think, a period of 4 to 8 weeks, where you look at every asset you can that matches the criteria of what you're looking for. And when you do that, then no one can pull the wool over your eyes, because you really understand what market value is for that type of product. So I think that's the number one mistake, is market knowledge.
Yeah, okay, awesome. Now, you've touched on this a little bit, but I just want to set the scene here so that the listeners can start to gauge a little bit more of some of the selling agents' tactics that they use to put buyers at a disadvantage. Can you just pick up on a couple more of those? It's probably more around some of the questions that agents ask prospective buyers that sound innocent, but are really giving
loaded.
The agent, some great info that's going to set themselves up in relation to how they're going to position the property.
Sure. Well, I mean, I briefly just talked about boots on ground, and that's because agents are notorious, and I was one of these agents, like everybody, that published the best possible version of the house that we could online. So if you're searching online and you're looking back at recent sales or even current listings, you're only seeing the absolute best of a property, not the weak points of a property. So that's one way that an agent's going to pull the wool over a lot of buyers that aren't doing their own market research. But in terms of the loaded scripts and the dialogues and things, I think buyers need to know, and a lot of them are aware of this, but maybe not to the true extent of just how deep it runs, that the agent is employed by the seller to get you to pay an emotional premium. That is their sole focus. So anyone that thinks that they're on buddy-buddy terms with their agent, that's great. But at the end of the day, a good agent is there to extract the highest amount of money they can from you in every single transaction. So the way they might do that, or the way that I would do that, if I can put myself in those shoes when I was at an open for inspection, is I'd be forever asking you closing questions. So if Bushy, you came through one of my open for inspections, I would be gently dropping into a conversation questions like, how's this compared to, what else you've seen in the marketplace? What property does this compare closest to that you may have just seen or liked or bid at? Things like that. Now, I'm recording all that information. It might just sound like general chit chat, but what I'm trying to establish is where this sits in your pecking order. And I'm going back to the office, and to give you some depth or color around this, I used to build an Excel spreadsheet at the start of every sales campaign. I'd send that daily to my vendors, and it would have every buyer's name, the date of inspection, all of their feedback, good, bad, or ugly, and I would color code them as to whether they had a contract, whether they'd made an offer, and at what level or timing they were at. And I'd get that to my client every day so they knew exactly the hard work that I was putting into it. But why I was doing that is because Bushy would come through my open for inspection today. I'd ask those questions. But in 2 weeks' time, when Bushy comes back and says, I love this property, we're going to make an offer, you're thinking you want 1.1, Scott. Well, we think it's only worth $1,080,000. I'll go back to my spreadsheet, and Bushy will have told me that he thinks it's better than 12 Smith Street, which just sold last Saturday for $1,020,000, or whatever it is, 1.12 or whatever the number is. And that'll give me a really good gauge as to how hard I push you in a negotiation, because I've already spoken to you before this negotiation about where you think this house is positioned. So that's just one really broad example of how we would go about doing that. But I would constantly be trying to close clients at every meeting, phone call, email. You're trying to move people closer and closer to the finish line.
Yeah, totally. Well, that's a great segue into looking at the quite unique approach that you've adopted. I'd love for you, without giving away any trade secrets, Scott, I'd love you to talk us through the approach that you adopt right from the get-go, right through to actually securing and settling the property. Can you just sort of take us on that journey? Because the reason I'm saying that is that negotiation starts right at the start, in my view. A lot of people think negotiation's just the heckling you're doing with the agent when you're putting in a price. That's almost at the end of that negotiation journey in my head. But I'd love your thoughts around that and how that's influenced what you do and when you do it before you get to that point.
Yeah, sure. And again, this is probably another one we could spend an hour talking about the nuts and bolts of this stuff. But generally speaking, from a top line view, the first thing I do, Bushy, is really ask you, what are you trying to achieve as a buyer? Like, is this, so I want to establish whether or not this is actually the property that you should buy. And I'm not trying to play God in that situation in terms of telling you you should buy this or you should buy that. But I really want to understand, is this the right property for you before you go headlong into making a massive financial commitment? So that's typically what I do with my clients as the very first starting point, and get an understanding of what you've looked at before, what you've bid on and missed potentially, how you arrived at this stage in front of me before we start negotiations on this particular property. So that's step one. Step two would be to play a game with you, Bushy, and say to you, what is the absolute maximum walkaway price? And in my terms, I call that the target price. What's the target price, Bushy, that you want to set to purchase this property today? Now, a lot of buyers, I'd say the vast majority of them, haven't thought about that. And they're either bound by two things. One is what they're capped at in terms of their their ability to repay a certain amount and what the banks or lenders will give them, or two, what they actually have done their research on and what they believe is fair market value for it. But mostly it comes down to affordability. So people will say, well, it's on at $1 million. I want to pay 900 grand or whatever it is, for example. And then I'll have to work out and unpack why they think it's worth 900 grand and then educate them that 900 grand is because that's your lending ability or your purchasing power, and it's got nothing to do with market value. They're two very, very different things. So I'll try and gauge what they're prepared to spend and then ascertain whether or not that's going to be realistic on that property by then talking through comparable sales and doing some research. But the game that I play with them at that point to understand what their true walkaway price is to say, if we use that example of 900,000 is where you think you're going to set your target price, I'll say to you, Bushy, okay, so if I could secure the property today at 910,000 and not a dollar less, would you buy the property? And then I shut up.
Yep.
And they go, look, we've been looking for months or weeks. Yeah, sure. If we could get it for 910, we'd still do it. Great. Okay. So if you could get the property today for 920 and not a dollar less, what will you do?
Yeah.
And then I just wait. I don't know. Well, we don't really want to go to 920, but I guess if we absolutely had to push and shove, we'd go to 920. Okay, great. And I just keep playing that game until it hits a point at which they go, no, we'll walk away. The reason I do that is to not move their target price, okay? It's got nothing to do with how much money I'm making in the back end in terms of trying to save the money below the target price. The reason I do that is because I don't want the client trying to make an emotional decision like that when they're under a blowtorch from the agent at the 11th hour. And that's exactly what happens, as you know. They're going to get to a point at some point in that process where they're possibly got to make a very quick decision, and you don't want them to lose a house over 10 grand or overpay by 20 or 30 grand in that instance. So they need to know what that drop dead number is. And when they do know that number, when you get to that point, if they get pushed to 920, if you say that's their target price, and we have to get pushed all the way to 920 when we make an offer, and then someone else offers more than that, they can hand on heart walk away and go, do you know what? We thought about this last week or 3 days ago. That's our absolute max on that property. We're happy to walk away.
Yeah.
There's no buyer's remorse and no regret. So that's a big part of that kind of next stage that I work through before I then pick up the phone and talk to the agent and then establish where I can buy that property. And how I do that, Bushy, is really through a series of questions. I want to determine the seller's motivation. I want to understand that the seller is ready to sell. If we put an offer on the table that's acceptable to them, are they actually ready to trade today? Often that answer is no. They want to see more of the market. whatever reason, they're not quite ready to sell today. They've got other interests. There's more buyers that haven't yet put an offer on the table. So I want to know all those things before I go out on the limb and put a number on the table that is potentially then used against my buyer to leverage another purchaser beyond that price point. So ask lots of questions around that to establish the vendor's motivation and the timing of the sale. And then I ask very clear and concise questions of the selling agent. What will buy the property today? And then I shut up. And then you'll hear them flounder. You'll hear them jump down your throat sometimes with an answer straight away. You'll hear them have a long pause and really think about it and give you a proper answer. You'll hear them tell you what the last offer was and where the vendor's at currently. There's a multitude of different answers and different directions I can go in, but it's me asking that very direct question. A couple of things happens here. Very often, they'll tell me the very specific number I need to pay straight away, and I can determine whether or not that's fair market value or not, but that's a different set of circumstances. But very often, they'll tell me, or very often, I can hear them flounder and bullshit to me, and that's when I know that I'm not going to trust this agent from start to finish, and that I need to be really careful how I play that negotiation, because I'm not going to be able to trust anything that comes out of their mouth. So asking those hard questions up front really sets the tone for me before I then build a negotiation strategy around what my client's got in terms of their buying power and where I can position them to try and save them some money.
Love it, love it. And there's a couple of things I'm picking up on there, both in terms of when you're getting a brief from a buyer that you're looking after, but also the selling agents, is the power of the pause. So you're asking the question and then you're allowing the silence to fill the room, which gives, there's almost a momentum pressure then for the seller's agent to fill that space, and quite often, from what I'm hearing, giving you information that in a normal course of events they're probably not happy giving away.
Yeah, and I think I get a lot more information than, say, you would if you were just Joe Blogs on the street. So I don't know if it's the way that I ask questions, or if it's how direct I am, or the fact that I'm talking to them as an industry peer, if you will. But I get a lot more information out than the standard lines that they throw away to each buyer that walks through the open home or calls up to show an interest in a property. So I can't stress this enough, that whether you use me or another property professional, if you're a purchaser and you're serious, outsource it to someone else that has done this for their career and understands the nuances when they're negotiating, because they will get more out of these conversations than you ever will. Because if you deal with an agent, they just treat you as a sheep. Yep. They just give you the same throwaway lines, and you'll know this, Bushy, better than anyone, but it's along the lines of, thanks very much for your interest. The vendors would sell at that level. If the auction was today, they're really committed to the process, or they're not ready to sell. They really, whatever the reason is, there's a throwaway, line after line that I could drop in here to tell the story. But, if I go in and I ask those hard questions, very often they'll tell me the legit answer of where it needs to be. And it just cuts through that process and reduces the time, and also gives me, I think, an unfair advantage over buyers that aren't doing this.
Love it, love it. The other thing I'd love you to share, and again, we could go off on a tangent here, but just in brief terms, you've obviously got a highly tuned bullshit barometer, having been on all sides of the fence pretty much. What are the giveaway signs that an agent's bullshitting to you?
Yeah, well, one of the talks that I do to conferences is agent BS and how to avoid it. So I'm well versed in the lines, and that's because I used to write them or spew them when I was an agent and teach other people how to do it as well. So definitely well versed. And I think it gives so much of it away if you know, and this is why people have got to outsource this to someone that's an expert in doing this, because if I speak to you, Bushy, and you give me the same sales dialogue that every other agent's going to give me, I know when you're going to throw a certain line at me and why you threw it. Okay. And that's the key to it. It's just repetition, right? Like, I've done over 3,000 property deals, what you find is 99% of the agents are all trained the same way. They say the same thing at the same time. So I know when they're going to say something, and I can almost recite it word for word before it comes out of their mouth. Right. And that shows me straight away they don't have a buyer. or they do have a buyer, and it's just the very subtle differences in the way that they deliver that message to me that I just have honed over many, many years. So it's really crucial that you understand that. And if you can spot those things, it's such an unfair advantage in a negotiation, because they're lying, they don't have someone, and that just puts you in a position of power. I can give you a really brief example of this, and I won't go naming names and the rest of it, but I bought a property for a client in a very high-profile part of the country with one of the leading agents in the country just before Christmas. And I was really excited because I hadn't bought a property through him before. I've known him for many years. And I thought, well, this will be great. This was me pitting my skills at the top of my game versus someone else that's a market leader in what they do. This will be great to learn what scripts and dialogues they say and how they, deal with a negotiation. So I was actually genuinely really excited to start this negotiation. I was incredibly underwhelmed, Bushy. What came back was just, 21-year-old schoolboy dribble.
Really?
And I was shocked, absolutely shocked. This is a guy that is, everywhere in the media. And I was so disappointed that I'd got to this point in my career and I thought this is going to be the pinnacle of it, of what I have to compete against. And it was just rubbish. And I thought, well, this is amazing, because this is showing me that the vast, section of the buying public are that uneducated about scripts and dialogues that they fall for this bullshit and they can't see through it. And that's shocking, absolutely shocking to me. So I was really surprised that was a real eye-opener for me.
Yeah, I love that. So building rapport with the selling agents is obviously something that you're very good at, and therefore enables you to get more info out of them than the average punter. How do you go about building that rapport?
For a buyer or for me?
Yeah, well, probably generally for a buyer, but then give us your take on it.
Yeah, I think for buyers, the best thing is showing up. So showing up and consistency in doing so. And the way to do that is what I touched on before. Give yourself 4 to 8 weeks to really understand a marketplace. You shouldn't be in a marketplace for 6 months unless the turnover is very hard to find what you're looking for. But typically, for most of us in Australia, it should be a short 4 to 8 weeks to understand what's happening in a marketplace and be able to build rapport with agents quickly. So showing up means build the way that I do it, and I teach all my my clients to do it, is to build a BCC email with the top agents in the local area that sell the type of asset that you want to buy. So my BCC email to the top agents in Mermaid Waters would be, it's a dot point, 5 to 7 dot points. It would be Scott Aggett, $2 million, finance approved, knockdown, east of the easement, Mermaid Beach. That's any agent that's worth their salt knows exactly what that means.
Yep.
Okay. Yep. And I'm putting that out to them every week. It costs me nothing. It's free. And what happens is those 25, 50 agents, however many people you put on your list in that BCC, start ringing you and text messaging you. And the key then is to follow up and go and see those properties. The biggest tip I can give buyers in that situation to build rapport with agents and to make sure you get these opportunities again offered to you in future is that you turn up, or you tell them why you can't be there, and you're incredibly responsive so they don't think you're a time waster. And most importantly, you give them very good feedback, buyer feedback. They need that to do their job. So if you can help them do their job, they're going to help you into more opportunities. So if you see a property and you don't like it for whatever reason, tell them, be honest. It's only going to help them do their job. And at the same time, it's going to help them hone their knowledge of your search criteria so that they can put the right property in front of you next. So showing up often and building rapport like that is pretty easy if you turn up to open homes and turn up to private buyer appointments. And if you do that for a very short and sharp period, you'll be top of the game. In terms of how I do it, and to take it to the next stage in terms of the negotiation, I try to be as polite and friendly as possible. I'm incredibly responsive to people, and I try to help agents do their job because I know how they do their job. So if I know they haven't got their vendor under control, or their vendors, weighing up whether to accept an offer or hold on or whatever it might be, I'll talk to the agent and understand what tools that we can apply at that point to help them move their vendor to A to B and to get us into a position to buy the property. So I'm really an open book with agents and try to work with them as best I can and stay on good terms with them. Some of them make it very hard, Bushy. There's a lot of egos, a lot of sales talk, not a lot of listening from many of the agents. That's what I kind of deal with all day. But I try to build a strong base early with them, and then work with them as best I can to overcome and problem solve.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I think one of the key things, again, I'm picking up from yourself, is you're a very good listener, and you allow space to listen. So you're not filling the gap yourself. You're actually sitting back, and then that automatically creates a subtle pressure on the other person to be talking, and which is when you're going to hear that sort of gear. Another area I'd like to dig into a little bit, because unfortunately, particularly in the property sphere, most buyers think it's all about price. But you and I both know that there are a whole bunch of other negotiating points that can be actually bigger drivers to a vendor than price. Can you share with us what some of those are, and what sort of other approaches you can take other than price to be securing the property that the average punter wouldn't be thinking about?
Well, I think your last question's a good segue into this one, really, because it's really honed in on that problem solving, right? And that's what I have to do a lot to get deals across the line. It might be, I'll give you the latest example. I bought a house yesterday in Avalon in Sydney for clients. The vendors wanted 12 weeks. We wanted 6 weeks settlement. We had to show some flexibility around that. But because I ask the question always when I put the offer forward is, what is the ideal terms to your client? I got the answer back of what it was, and that positioned me differently to what the other buyer was doing, which was just hammering down the door that they wanted a set time frame that didn't work for the client, didn't work for the seller. So if you ask those questions, then you can relay that back in the form of your offer. Get rid of as many speed humps as possible to make sure your offer is as clean as it can be and as attractive as the seller wants, and that will fast track that process. So I think it's problem solving like that is the key thing for me. If you can come up with solutions around settlement times, deposit release is a big one as well. If someone needs to go on to make a forward purchase, that's one that we often have to deal with. Rent back is another one in this market that's been interesting, because there's obviously been a shift to lifestyle-driven purchasing decisions. So people are selling in capital cities. They're going to regional areas, whether that's a smaller city like Newcastle or Wollongong, or if they're going further afield like Mornington Peninsula out of Melbourne, or the Blue Mountains, for example. Those people often need more time. Those properties don't come up as often as they would potentially see in, say, Surrey Hills, where there's a dime a dozen of the same terrace houses. If they're looking for a particular lifestyle change, it might take a while to find that. So rent back options have been a big one for me. There really is so many. I mean, there's inclusions with fixtures and finishes, I should say, furniture and those likes. I really go to great lengths to understand what the seller wants, and then we try to piece it together to make it as attractive as possible.
Yeah, exactly. And you mentioned some great ones there, but the key point here is price is only one of the negotiating points, and that the more you can glean from the selling agent in such a way that you can then put together a deal that, I often use the example, if you're hitting the things that are really important to the seller, not so easy in the current environment, but you might be able to put in a lower price, but with early settlement or rent back or those other things that you're mentioning that are more important to the vendor that do two things. One, makes your offer completely different to every other offer that's being put on the table, but also is getting closer to exactly what's important to the seller. So
yeah, absolutely. And a good example of this at the moment is in Southeast Queensland, which is just red hot, right, in terms of buyer depth. Often I find myself one of 20, one of 50 buyers making a formal offer on contract on the same day to buy properties that are in the kind of sweet spot of 5, 6, 700,000 for a 3 or 4 bedroom house in Southeast Queensland. So the sheer buyer depth is just crazy. I've never seen it like this before. But often I'll talk to the agents and I'll say to them, how did it play out? We won, and tell me about what the rest of the offers look like. And they'll say to me, well, there was 52 offers. 50 of them were conditional on finance and went straight in the bin. And it was between you and another buyer. It was unconditional. So if you just ask the question up front, I knew that right in advance, that the only way I'm going to win is if it's an unconditional offer. So I'm saying to my clients, look, your mortgage broker is saying to you, it's got to be subject to finance. But everything's coming back at the valuation price, right? Coming back at contract price when you do a valuation, if you're talking about paying a fair price in a marketplace and not getting carried away. So the risk is if you put a finance clause in there, you are 100% going to lose. If you make it unconditional, what's the risk? If you have to weigh that up, and it might be for some people that it's a massive risk, but for others, they might go, well, it's not much. I mean, it's just because my, finance approval lapsed. I haven't changed jobs. I've still got a great job, still got great equity, still got a big deposit. It's the walk-up start. Well, then you're going to miss this house, and it's going to cost you 2.5% a month in growth until you find the next one. So if you put a finance clause in there, it's the death of you, and it's going to cost you 25 grand. So you've got to think about these things to really repackage them and to be more attractive. The other really easy thing that I do a lot that I don't think I've ever heard anyone else advising their clients to do is, if a property comes on the market and it's going to get snapped up on the first weekend, which is a lot of the country right now, and if you want to do a building and pest inspection and you're going to join the queue of other buyers that are going to do the same thing, when you see the property that come up on a Monday or a Tuesday listed and you can't get in until Saturday, book the building and pest inspection to be done before Saturday.
Yep.
No one has ever told me that. And I'm like, it's just a simple thing. Get ahead of your competition. Do whatever you can. Crawl over broken glass to get your nose in front of everyone else. And the reason why it works so well is the agents don't care. They want the building and pest done as well. So you get the building and pest done. But I tell my buyers, turn up at the end of the building and pest for two reasons. One, very often you'll get in the house when you're not supposed to be there, which is a big thing. And then you can make a decision to go on an unconditional contract before anyone else has even seen the property. But two, failing that, or even in addition to that, the building and pest guy is going to give you a full verbal rundown, which enables you to go to contract before you have to wait 24 hours to get the written report. So it's just little things like that, that having been in the game for a long time, it's like, what would I do in this situation to cheat or life hack and get there before other buyers? And that's often the difference between my clients winning a property and everyone else in the queue missing out.
Absolutely love it. That is a cracker, mate. Slipstreaming on the building and pest. That's a brilliant takeaway for anyone listening. That's certainly something that I've heard very few people even think about. So love that, mate. Let's dig into the current environment, because let's face it, it's very much a seller's market. And yes, it's slowing down a little bit, but there's still a fair bit of heat in the exercise, and will be for a little while yet. In terms of those listening and or your own approach, given that most sellers agents know that there's a bucket of people falling over themselves to put an offer on a property, what approach do you take to try and equal a balance in that regard and put yourself in a stronger position so that you are levelling the playing field?
Well, I think speed kills, Bushy, in the first instance. So, I coach all my clients to get through the buying process or the steps of the buying process faster than anyone else can. And that doesn't mean rushing. That just means doing what I said to you with that last little hack, or understanding what the steps are and moving through it like grease lightning with the confidence to do it. So if you can do that, that's going to give you, I think, a big upper hand, because speed is often a driver for just getting your nose ahead and getting the deal done. But it doesn't mean you're necessarily going to buy it any cheaper. But it just means you've got a better chance of actually securing it, because the longer the property remains on the market, the more chance they're going to introduce other competition to you. The more time buyers have got, the more emotionally invested they are. And then what we're starting to see, or we have been seeing for the last 18 months, is things like bank of mum and dad that come into play. You leave people with weeks to think about a property. They fall in love with it. They can't afford it. They go back to mum and dad or wherever else they're going to get their money from, arm themselves up to the teeth to come back on auction day or later in the process, and they've just got more ammunition to run you down at the end. So getting to the property first, getting your ducks lined up in your due diligence really quickly, and then getting an unconditional offer with no speed humps in it as best you can is going to give yourself the highest chance, I think, of landing the property on the right terms for you.
Yeah, love that. One of the, and I'll be interested in your thoughts on whether it works in the current market, but one of the techniques I normally use is even in the early discussions with a selling agent, if I'm interested in a particular property, I'll always drop in that I've put in an offer on another property, and that I'm confident about, but I'm still looking at others, and I then put a timeline and set some expectations around the dollars that I'm paying, so that all of a sudden I'm starting to shift the balance of power back into my own sphere and put some pressure on the vendor. What's your view around that sort of approach and how relevant it is to the conditions that we're currently experiencing?
Well, you're doing two things there. You're reversing the fear of loss and you're using leverage. And they're two of the things that I apply in my negotiation strategies very often. I wouldn't say I use the leverage part of it all the time, but it definitely is used at the right times when the opportunity presents itself. The way to do that successfully, I think, Bushy, is to, and this is when I've got the ability to coach my clients from an earlier position rather than them just ringing me on the day and saying, hey, I've got a property in front of me, let's buy it right now in the next 20 minutes, which often happens to me. It's probably 50% of my buyers are like that. But if I've got the ability, I love those ones, like, here it is, ready, set, go. But if I've got the ability to work with people over some time, or if they've missed a property and they've come to me and sort of looking for ways of getting ahead on the next deal, I'll do exactly that. And the way I think you do that is to plant the seed at the private buyer appointment or the open for inspection that you're already a long way down the track on another property, or you're under offer on a property off market. You never want to tell the agent where that property is, because they'll just keep digging and try and talk you out of it, even though it's fictitious. So once you've done that, you don't want to make a big deal out of it. So how I would do it is just say, yeah, look, we're a long way down the path on another property. In fact, we've got offer and acceptance. So we're just, before we commit to that, we're just running around seeing everything. We've seen this one. We really like it. We'll come back to you. And then the next phone call, whether it be a day later, an hour later, or a week later, I'll call them and say, look, we've decided that this one is something that we want to go after. It's our preference. As you know, and you refer to the peanut that you dropped a week ago or a day ago, as you know, we're a long way down that path, and I'm getting grief from that agent because they want it unconditionally exchanged before whatever, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and we've got to make a decision on that one. We don't want to miss both, but the key word in this, Bushy, is preference. Priority, preference, however you want to word it. This house is our preference. Otherwise, agents don't take you. They just think you're playing them off against another property, and they hate that. But if you drop that word into it, they think, okay, they're focused on our property, so I'll exhaust their interest on this one right here in front of me. And then you go into it, and then you can use it as leverage. And you might say, great, well, look, based on the fact we can buy that for X and our market knowledge, having, been here for 4 to 8 weeks, you've seen us everywhere, as you know, we believe the value is this to us. But as you know, it's not us, it's the other agent and the other seller putting pressure on us. So I'm not putting a time limit on it, but we're just bound by the fact that we've got to get this done by close of business tomorrow, whatever it might be. So every buyer that put a time limit on us, agents hate that. They really don't like that. If it's not done by 12 o'clock, we're walking kind of thing. It's almost fires up an agent to sell it to somebody else. Yeah. So it's really, you've got to be really clever with how you use that. And I think for people that haven't done this a lot of times, it can be quite dangerous, because the easy way is just to put a time limit on it. Yeah. The longer way is the way that I just explained, to plant the seed, come back, water it, refer to it again, and watch that grow into the story. Yeah. But the key to it, once you've dropped it and referred to that other property and start using it as leverage, and then you make your offer, is changing the conversation from budget to value. So the very first thing I'll do for clients when I call the agent, if I'm making an offer, is to say, look, I know your vendor wants $1 million, and for well and good that our budget is 980 or whatever. That's the budget that they've got on the property that they've been working with, but we just don't see value at that level. We see value at 950, and these are the reasons why. So I get rid of the elephant in the room in terms of what your budget is straight away. Yeah. And I change the conversation from budget to value, because if you put yourself in the agent's shoes when they're conveying your offer to the seller, if they say Bushy's made an offer of 980 and they're capped at 980, so there's nothing else they can do, they really want to buy it, but they've only got 980. That's one conversation. Buyer two is, Scott's made an offer of 980 because they're only seeing value at that level based on this sale, and this sale, and they're not prepared to pay $1 more. It's a very different conversation. The vendor says to Bushy's offer, thank Bushy very much for his offer on my property, but he can't afford my house. He hasn't got enough money.
Yeah.
But the buyer too dictates a different response. The response to that is, okay, well, maybe we have to think about this. X and Y sold down the road on Saturday for this, and yeah, this looks like it's as good as we're going to get in terms of that's true market value. So you got to think about what the agent's going through and how to help them get the deal closed, and that's changing it from budget to value, and that gets away from people having to lie up front about what their budget is as well, and they can be really honest about what they're searching for.
I love it, and it all comes down then to that research element that you spoke about before. If you're intimately aware of what's happening in that location for that style of property, and you can give valid examples, then you're actually giving ammunition to the agent to help qualify the vendor on what they should be expecting to get for that property. So it's as you've said a number of times, you're actually helping the agent do his job, and you're doing it in such a way that you're not on. You don't have boxing gloves of. You're not on opposite sides of the arena. You're putting a very rational and reasoned,
well thought through, well reasoned argument as to where it should sit. And the other thing of using a third party, and why it's so beneficial to buyers in this situation, is I've got the ability to go in there, and which I often do, and say, look, their budget's $980, but they can actually spend a couple of $100,000 more than that. They just don't want to. So I get rid of that. They can't afford it straight away by just saying, actually, they've got way more money. They just don't want to spend it on this house. Yeah. And then that gets rid of that elephant in the room as well straight away. But you can only say that really, it's easier said by a third party than it is by the buyer.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. It's spot on. And it gives it a lot more credence as a consequence of that. Particularly if it's someone like you who's known in the industry for being an industry professional. The minute you walk through the door, you pick up the phone to talk to an agent, they're going to know that they're playing in a completely different sphere as far as negotiating that property purchase is concerned.
I hope so.
Yeah. No, I love that. Now, this next question, because I'm sort of mindful that we could go off on another tangent here, and I'll probably get you back at some other stage to do a deep dive on this, but there are obviously very different negotiation approaches between a private treaty, an auction, and a best offer buy style of an exercise. Just without going into too much detail here, are there any sort of key suggestions you'd make in relation to the differences in approach around those three methods of sale?
I think a lot of it comes back to the same set of questions that you need to establish before you make any offer. So, whether it's sealed bids or, boardroom auction or a real auction or however you want to, private treaty offer, you still want to know so you can fill in all the blanks really in terms of your offer as to what is going to be the right fit for the vendor to make it as attractive as possible. There's a lot. Yeah, you could go down a huge tangent here, but in terms of the auctions side of it, you'll get a lot of pushback on certain methods of sale as to why they're not ready to sell or why they want to go down a certain path. And it's my job to overcome that and try and wrap it up on our terms as quickly as possible. And that is hard to do, but that's the challenge. And I guess that's where the skill is trying to dictate terms and control that negotiation as best you can. The sealed bids one is really hard because you get stuck in a situation where you're bidding in the dark. So the way to make sure that you're not overpaying in that situation, at least as a bare minimum, is to try to build rapport with the agent, as we've discussed earlier, and get an idea by just asking it multiple different ways as to where you think you need to be positioned to buy the property. And they often won't tell you what the number is, but what I'm hoping to get out of it at the very least is what someone else has offered and where you might need to be a serious contender on the property. And then the rest is just down to where we think market value is and what the budget is for the client. So you might get a throwaway line from an agent like, look, you'd need to be at 600 plus to be serious on it. And that's better than going in at 595 and missing it. So you just got to ask those questions rather than blindly just putting bids in and acting how the agent wants you to act. And they're just going to treat you like a sheep, and they're going to get you into that highly emotional state and try to have you compete against everybody else. So that's also true at auction. Bushy, you would have seen this a million times. People bidding against themselves at the end of an auction in a live auction situation. That's one of the horror shows that I sadly see every Saturday play out, where people stand at a public auction, which the agent dictated they had to, when they tried to buy it 4 weeks earlier and the agent wouldn't let them. They get to a public auction. They openly bid, as does all the other registered bidders. It gets to a certain price point, which is often in this market above where everyone thought it was going to run to. And then they still don't drop the hammer. And the agent comes over to you and says, well, we're 50,000 away from reserve or whatever it is. And then they start bidding against themselves. So that's when you've really got to be strong and fall back on your market knowledge and understand as well that if you're at a public auction and you've got, your hand up last, then, by all accounts, you are market value. And if you're bidding against yourself, you're really just bidding against the vendor's ego. And it's time now that the vendor has to meet market. You need to stay strong in those situations.
And hence reinforcing what you've said a couple of times, and that is get someone independent to do it, because that removes the whole emotion from that very, very charged environment where you're on the spot, you're in the spotlight, everyone's looking at you, and your partner's going, I really love this, I really want to get this property. If that's completely diffused, if they've got someone like you that's standing there staring back at the agent and staring them down.
Yeah, it's massively important. I think if you can do it at an arm's length and have someone else that's in control of that process, it will make a big, big difference to how you end that auction bid or any of those other bids, to be honest, because you need someone that's keeping you in check, and you need to have someone that's holding you accountable in terms of what your final target price is, because that's where you've got the ability to spend that, 10, 20, 50 grand too much. And really it's dead money, and you're paying, over the course of the life of a loan, including this extra stamp duty, you're probably paying double what you need to. So 50,000 extra today is really 100 grand over the course of a normal home loan. So yeah, you want to try and make sure that you buy it on the best possible terms. And I've been saying a lot lately as well that buying real estate is not a game where you learn from your mistakes. You're talking about the biggest financial asset in your life. If you believe that you can out-negotiate an agent who trains every day with scripts and dialogues to get you to pay an emotional premium, you're either better than I am or you're living in la-la land. So, if you're talking about, spending such big, vast sums of money, you really want to know what you're doing. It's not a game to go and practice and make mistakes and end up paying that mistake off for the next 30 years.
Totally agree. And it's given the way you orientate your fee structure, which is, the more you save and the more you get paid, there's a big incentive for you to get a good result on that. You're clearly, because you're doing this every day of the week, going to get a far better result than someone who's doing it once every 5, 10 or 15 years. So,
yes.
Love that. Now, sort of final question before we switch into the ambush round. I'll be interested in your thoughts on this. Is given how heated the market has been and to some degree continues to be, is there ever a time when it's not a good time to buy a property, or ever a time when you go, let's just walk away, cool the jets, and we'll wait for the market in this particular location to simmer down?
I think having been so heavily involved in this, in the real estate game for the last 25 years plus, the answer to that's got to be no. I think you just got to be in the market all the time. And it depends on what you're buying for. Like if you're trying to flip property or develop property and it's the absolute peak of a very frothy market, you have to be really careful about how you play that. But if you're buying for the long term, which most buyers should be doing, the medium to long term, then it's just a matter of being in the market for the most days possible. Because we've seen over time that just keeps compounding, and that's where people have built, tremendous wealth over a long period. So I think there's not necessarily a bad time to buy or a good time to buy. I think it's just when you can afford it, when you're comfortable doing so, and when you're educated to do so. That you're not just bidding in the dark and doing something because your friends are doing it. And it's a lifelong commitment. It's a huge financial outlay, and it shouldn't be done with blinkers on.
Love it. Final comments then, just in your own read, given you're very actively in the marketplace across the country at the moment. What's your outlook on where you see property heading this year in the short to medium term?
Oh, God, I don't have a crystal ball. I steer out of these conversations bushy as much as possible because I leave it to the data nerds and people that are smarter than me to work this out. But the way that I look at it is, for example, I've had 2 buyers this week say to me, panic. Commonwealth Bank have come out and said that, it's going to drop 10% next year. And I said, well, if you read the article, it says 5 to 10%. Yeah. And that's after it goes up 5 to 7% this year in the same article. And then long term, where were they last year? They got it dramatically wrong last year. So why would you believe them this year? So it's so hard. There's so much misinformation in the industry and the media. I can see things changing in some areas, but it really is down to micro markets. As a selling agent, this is so important for buyers to understand this as well. What was happening in Potts Point was different to what was happening in Elizabeth Bay, which was different to what was happening in Paddington at any given time. It's supply and demand is crucial to understanding what's happening in any given marketplace. So there's no one size fits all answer to say the market's up or the market's down. It really depends on what's happening in your local hood. But I think if you fall back on the things that we just discussed, is buy when it's the right time for you to buy, sell, for when you need to sell and readjust your life. And a lot of people say to me that are professionals in the property space, you're doing it all wrong. You should buy and never sell. And that's probably the case. They're probably right in terms of a long-term investment strategy. I would have been far better off to just sit and do nothing on the properties that I owned at the time, like maybe kept 2 or 3 of them, and I'd be, very wealthy today. But it also would have been a shit boring life story, which would have killed me anyway. So, I just wanted to roll the dice and have a go. So it's horses for courses, Bushy.
Yeah, I love it, mate. And that's I couldn't have said it better myself, mate. I'm always interested in people's views around that, because I've always thought the same thing, that the best time to buy property is every time you can afford to, and providing it's the right thing at the right time. So it's but it is very much a horses for courses exercise. And someone like yourself, like you said, a buy and hold exercise, you'd be climbing the walls with boredom. You need to keep yourself active. Well, it's a matter of if you recognise that, and buying and flipping properties is your thing. It's just turning that into an art and a science, so that you're making sure you're making money out of it. Now, love that, mate. Thanks for those thoughts, mate. Let's sort of bridge now into the old favourite ambush session, or the bushfire lightning round, as I like to call it.
I'm scared.
I'll give you a blindfold and a cigarette, mate, so you're all good. But, mate, what's your favourite quote and why?
I think my favourite thing that I like to live by, and I don't know if anyone in particular said this, but it's not how hard you work, it's the projects that you work on and the people you work with. I think that's absolutely like a great foundation, because people just feel like they can outwork someone else, and everyone's just trying to beat each other by saying, I work till 9 o'clock at night, I work 7 days a week, or whatever it might be. But it's more about finding something that you're really passionate about, surrounding yourself with the right people, and working smart. So I love that. I fall back on that one all the time.
Yeah, love it. On the literary front, you've mentioned a couple during our chat already today, but what would be the top book that you'd recommend listeners have a read of, and why?
Probably the book that changed my life the most was The 4-Hour Working Week by Tim Ferriss, 4-Hour Work Week. And most people have read that book, I'm sure, already. It's not a new book, but that really changed the way that I looked at life and life hacks in general. So I think that one was really fundamental to my switch up and growth in my career and personally. I'd have to say the most interesting book that I've read recently is The Thought Leader's Practice, which I just finished, which is by Peter Cook. And I would get murdered if I didn't mention that, because I'm about to fly to Melbourne for a 7-hour mentoring session with him next week.
I haven't heard of that one, mate, but now that you've mentioned it, I'm going to stick it straight on the Kindle list, because I just love to read. So it sounds like one that's well worth dipping the toe in. Mate, changing subjects a bit, taxes are a thing that a lot of Aussies believe they pay too much of. So what's the top legal thing that you've done to minimise the tax that you pay?
I think probably the easiest one that I've done that has served me well over the years, up until the APRA changes, was buying and selling my own properties and living there for a period of time and not paying any capital gains tax, because obviously that's a huge one.
Yeah.
So rather than have investment properties and selling those, I've been doing it mainly as my principal place of residence, and just over time to not flag it with the ATO that I've been doing that as a commercial decision. So I've just done it from time to time and done well out of that, I think. And I guess the other things is maybe setting up family trust. So, each time I sold one of my franchises or my rent rolls, that I was able to disperse money to my wife and things to reduce my tax liabilities there, which I think was much better, and put money into super and things to reduce the tax that I was paying along the way.
Love it. Awesome. Now, back on the investment sphere, what's both the worst and the best piece of investment advice that you've ever received to date, mate?
Oh, that's a hard one, Bushy. I I go back to, I think, probably something that's driven me really hard. So I would say it's not necessarily investment advice, but maybe a bad piece of advice. I hate saying this because it was mum, but at least like she came from a good place and it's driven me to where I've got to today. But I remember mum saying to me, school's not working out for you. Let's focus on a trade. And we'll find, you should go and do a trade, a good, honest career like that. And it is absolutely a great, honest career. And, right now you could be making tons of money out of it as well. But I felt that at the time that was really not what I wanted to do and what my life was destined to do. And that drove me to kind of go and find something that I was passionate about. So that's possibly the worst or best bit of advice that I had there. Maybe not investment advice. I don't know. I get a lot of people that keep saying to me, buy and hold, and very stringent on their strategy. And that, you touched on that just before, that works for some people and that works for possibly the masses, but it doesn't necessarily work for the individual. So
yep.
I think finding the right path for you is really important, and embracing that and fine tuning it to derive the best outcome in life you can.
I totally agree. Listeners would have heard me say this 1,000 times, but my own belief is that sustainable success in anything lies at the intersection of self, health, and wealth. And what I mean by that is that a lot of people focus on the external world and chase money and dollars on the wealth side of the equation. Very few do the self-reflection piece. And just like you took that time out yourself, you get to know who you are and what you're about, what your values are and what your vision is and what type of person you are. And that's a big component that needs to be fed into what and how you end up investing. And I'm really glad to hear you say that you've clearly know yourself pretty well and therefore pursue a style of investment that works for your personality. I'm with you that I don't believe there is a one-size-fits-all. It's about what is right for you and your circumstances and the goals that you have and the capacity you have to move from where you are to where you want to be. It's about as simple as that.
Yeah, and I guess everyone's got a different view of where they want to end up as well, right? So there's so many. I love listening to tech podcasts. I'm really into kind of the business world and listen to a lot of the stuff coming out of Silicon Valley. And you just realize that whatever we're doing in the property space, that there's just a million ways to build wealth and to have an interesting life. And I love that there's lots of different ways. So I guess, everyone's on a different journey. It just depends where you want to get to in the finish line.
Love it. Last question of the round. What's a happy habit or a rewarding ritual that contributes most to your investment success to date, mate?
I don't know. A ritual for me, I'd probably fall back on the architecture and design part of it, because I think that enables me to find opportunities in the real estate world, because I'm looking for ways to add value to properties and I'm watching what's on trend. So I think that's a love affair of mine on the side that feeds directly into the success that I have in flipping properties. So I think that's probably one thing. And from a health perspective, we've realized that we just love, negative ions down at the sand on the beach as a family. And if we get that, we're in our happy place. And that keeps me pretty grounded with the kids and with my wife, and that gives us the ability to work on the projects we love and be clear-headed about it all and focused.
Love it, mate. It's the simple things that are often the best, mate. Final question then: if your current self could talk to your school leaving self, what would you advise him to invest in, and what would you do differently?
Stop kicking the footy around, trying to aim it to get it into the bin at the other end of the playground. That would be the first thing I'd say. It's going to get you nowhere in life. You're never going to be a rugby league player. Beyond that, I think the biggest thing that we've discussed here that is just been repeated is life hacks. So I get asked this question quite a lot, Bushy, by other people saying, I want to go into the real estate industry. I'm thinking of changing into property from another career or whatever it might be. And my advice to all of them is the same. Go and find the absolute market leader in the most expensive suburb that you can work in that's near where you live, and ride on their coattails. And it might take you a few years till you absorb everything that they put out in the world, but you're going to get all their contact list, all their Rolodex, all their good habits, all their leadership qualities, And you're then going to end up in an incredibly expensive suburb with high net individuals as contacts, and you're going to be making more commission than anyone else. So if I was giving any advice to someone that was going into real estate or potentially into other fields in other industries, I'd say to them is find the absolute person that you want to be, that you look up to, and then just go and shadow them as best you can.
Love it. Love it. Yep, that is awesome advice, mate. Absolutely awesome advice. A great way to wrap up the exercise. As we bring it to a close then, what's next for you and Hello House?
Well, Hello House, I'm really pleased with is sort of going from strength to strength. So it's growing really fast. So I'm working nationally already, but I'm truly looking at scaling it this year. So that's exciting for me to hopefully build a big business there. And on the personal front, I'm developing 2 brand new luxury homes at Nobby's Beach on the Gold Coast, one of which will be home and one of which will sell. So yeah, I've got a lot going on there, and then I've got the business in Japan as well. So as lots of moving parts as well as hopefully being a good dad and a good husband.
Love it, mate. For those that have really got excited about the opportunity for someone like yourself to remove all the stress and headache from the negotiation process on a property they found or need help in finding and then negotiating, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you, mate?
Probably on social media, on Facebook or Instagram at the hellohouse.co, or at the website, which is hellohouse.co, and it's spelled Haus, the German spelling.
Love it, mate. Awesome. Look, it's been a great chat. I still feel we've only skated across the surface of a number of subjects that we can dive into in more detail. So we'd love to have you back at a later time to do exactly that. But in the meantime, mate, you've created a unique business model that I think is really going to catch on. And given the way you've set it up from a financial perspective, which is based on performance, I'll be really encouraging as many of the listeners out there who are looking to buy a property to get in touch with you, mate. So thanks for spending time on the show today.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Thanks, Scott. Talk again soon. Bye, mate.
Take care.
To get a summary of all this investment gold in the show notes, just email me on hello@khgroup.com.au. It's hello@khgroup.com.au. Or check us out at www.bushymartin.com.au/get-invested. I look forward to joining you next week for another episode of the Get Invested podcast. So thanks for listening, and as always, dream as if you'll live forever and live as if you'll die